Hi, welcome back to this Friday edition, the Sanctity of Life edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. Congenial, convivial, and amiable as always. Great to have you in the conversation today. The program is Focal Point. The network is the American Family Radio Talk Network, AFR Talk. Honored and pleased to welcome live to our decision maker line from Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, Dr. Michael New. Dr. New is the Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Michigan in Dearborn, and he's an adjunct scholar at the Charlotte Lozier Institute. He has been working in the area of social science as it relates to the pro-life issue. He's a frequent contributor to the National Review Online Corner. That's their blog. I'm on that site every single day, so I've often read some of Dr. New's contributions to the pro-life discussion. Dr. New, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Glad to be on. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you with us, Dr. New. I know things are very busy there and hectic as the March for Life unfolds and all of that, so we're very grateful that you've carved out some time to spend with us. And in particular, Dr. New, what I wanted to chat with you about, you have been working on the impact of pro-life laws. You have been working on issues that have to do with the debate and the discussion over the pro-life issue. And in particular, I wanted to chat with you for a few minutes about a piece that you've written called Promises Unkept. And yes, what you do in this piece is you debunk a number of the arguments that pro-abortion, pro-death forces use to justify abortion. I mean, they will tell us, look, if you abort a child, that means one less unwanted child in the world. That's going to mean less child abuse. That is going to mean less poverty. Every child will be a wanted child. So I want to have you walk through some of what you have discovered in your research as you evaluate these arguments that pro-abortion leaders have made.
Sure. That as everybody knows, this week is the 40th anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision, and I think that it would be a good idea if people kind of took a critical look of what's gone on during the past 40 years. And it's interesting. Most people who advocate on behalf of abortion today typically do so on the grounds of women's liberty or women's rights. But 40 years ago, there was another pretty popular line of argument. A lot of prominent people involved with abortion advocacy said that abortion would make society better. You would have fewer out-of-wedlock births. You would have less child abuse. And these arguments were fairly common. NARAL, as recently as 1978, was claiming abortion would reduce child abuse. Larry Lader, who was one of the founders of NARAL, claimed that abortion would usher in an era where every child was planned and wanted. And it's interesting. You don't hear people on the abortion side talking much like that today. And the reason why is there's just an enormous body of evidence for the past 40 years that abortion has not helped society. It hasn't reduced child abuse. It hasn't reduced out-of-wedlock births. It has not reduced crime. That the promises they made to us 40 years ago were promises unkept.
Well, let's talk about, walk through each one of these issues. Sure. Just in step. First of all, the whole issue of abortion and out-of-wedlock births, because it sort of sounds at a superficial level. Well, yeah, if you kill the baby before it's born, you're going to have fewer illegitimate births, fewer births out of wedlock. How has that worked out?
Well, the argument, again, was straightforward. Essentially, abortion would give sexually active single women the ability or the opportunity to not bear children out of wedlock. But it really didn't work out that way. What a lot of people didn't realize is abortion has done a lot to change sexual mores and sexual practices. After abortion was legalized, people engaged in sexual activity more often. They became less careful about using contraception. Probably the biggest thing that happened, I think, and probably the worst thing, was it changed the expectations of men. Prior to the abortion era, if a man got a woman pregnant, he was basically expected to marry her. After abortion was legal, that sort of social practice kind of disappeared. Men could essentially walk away from pregnancies they helped create. So essentially, that's a reason why you see, the out-of-wedlock birth rate not go down. Essentially, that after Roe v. Wade, you see more sexual activity, you see more conceptions. A higher percentage of these conceptions are aborted, but overall, the out-of-wedlock birth rate continued to climb. It didn't change at all.
And I'm sure you've seen that ad, Dr. New, done by the Center for Reproductive Rights with the suave, sophisticated black guy sipping on his scotch before a blazing fire, talking about basically his love affair with Roe v. Wade, wishing her a happy anniversary. And I wanted to get your reaction to that, because it seemed like that just kind of played into the worst stereotypes of black males, number one, but also kind of reinforced what you're saying right now, that what that did is it kind of released males from their sense of responsibility to do something with the life that they helped to create.
No, I agree. I think that ad was ridiculous, and I think that, pro-lifers rightly are pointing all the points out that you made and, poking a lot of fun at the abortion side. And it's interesting that the main kind of character in that ad is a man, because I think, frankly, abortion has done a lot more to liberate men than it's done anything for women. It's basically allowed men the opportunity to be a lot more sexually active, and it's lessened the consequences of their own sexual activity. So, I agree with you 100% on that I think that, it's kind of ushered in a culture of promiscuity, and I think it's done a lot more to, unfortunately, reduce the consequences for men who are choosing to have sex out of marriage.
Now, on the second issue that you address in this piece, Dr. New, the connection between abortion and child abuse, and again, sort of the superficial line of argument is, hey, if we abort children, you abort a child because you don't want it. If you have an unwanted child, the chances are higher that you're going to abuse that child. So this really, it's just bizarre and twisted, but almost treating abortion as something that's going to protect children from the risk of abuse. Respond to that.
Well, again, the argument superficially makes some sense that essentially that, abortion being legal, women who don't want to have children can choose an abortion, and some people thought, perhaps not unreasonably, that unwanted children would be more likely to suffer from abuse than wanted children. But that's not really consistent with the research. There are people who've researched child abuse, and they actually do find a very high percentage of children who are abused were actually planned and wanted. So I think that kind of turns the logic on its head as well. And there's other things that abortion's done to probably make child abuse more likely. For instance, I've said before, even after abortion, the out-of-wedlock birth rate continued to climb. There's some evidence that children born out of wedlock are more likely to suffer from child abuse than children born into a stable two-parent family. Another argument that's been put forth is from my friend Priscilla Coleman, who does research on the mental health effects of abortion. She finds that women who submit to abortion are actually more likely to abuse the children they give birth to. So there's been a lot of evidence to suggest that theoretically abortion may not reduce child abuse, and practically, if you look at statistics, child abuse has gone up dramatically since 1973. It went up, I think, close to 1,000% between 1973 and 2000. Some of that may be due to better reporting, but still, there's absolutely no evidence out there that abortion has done anything to reduce child abuse.
Well, it would seem like maybe the vectors would work the other direction. Talking here with Dr. Michael New, who is the assistant professor of political science at the University of Michigan Dearborn and adjunct scholar at the Charlotte Lozier Institute. And it would seem, Dr. New, that maybe the vectors would work the other direction. That abortion is the ultimate act of child abuse. It's violence against an unborn child. So it seems that it would be likely to lower the threshold in the minds of women, the minds of the populace against violence against children.
Yeah, there have been psychologists. I'm not a psychology expert. I don't have any training there, but there are psychologists who do make that argument. The fact that that abortion does turn women against their children, might, for a variety of psychological reasons, increase the incidence of child abuse. That's been an argument that others have put forth.
Now, the last thing I wanted to chat with you about is one of the more pernicious arguments, and that is that abortion will reduce crime. There was a book that was published back some time ago, a little over a decade ago, or an article published by a couple of researchers to this effect. Tell us what the theory is and how that matches reality.
Sure. This is kind of is somewhat interesting because this is one argument that most of the abortion rights people distance themselves from because they're kind of well aware it has some pretty evident eugenic implications. But the argument is this. There are certain demographic groups that are more likely than others to commit crime. these are also the same demographic groups that are likely to submit to an abortion. Now, one thing that's interesting about crime data is that we saw crime rates start to go down starting in the mid-1990s. And in 2001, a pair of economists, a guy named Stephen Levitt from the University of Chicago and a guy named John Donahue, who I think teaches at Yale, published a study where they argue that legal abortion essentially reduced the crime rate because essentially many would-be criminals were aborted away. That these would-be criminals who aborted away didn't go off and commit crimes, and hence the crime rate has gone down. And again, most people who support legal abortion wanted nothing to do with this argument because they realized it had pretty clear eugenic implications. But Stephen Levitt wrote a popular book known as Freakonomics, so his argument does seem to have some currency in the popular media and the popular culture. But there have been other researchers who've looked at this a little more critically, and I think they've raised some very valid objections. One thing that a lot of these researchers argue is that if the Levitt and Donahue hypothesis is correct, you would expect the post-Roe generation to be less likely to engage in crime than the pre-Roe generation. And that's actually not the case, that the cohort of 14 to 17-year-olds born after Roe v. Wade were actually much more likely to commit homicides than the cohort born before Roe. And there are other metrics of crime as well. They're essentially, when you break down crime by demographic age group, it just seems pretty clear that the group born after Roe v. Wade seems a lot more likely to commit crimes than the group born after Roe v. Wade. So, or the group born, that was born before Roe v. Wade. So, if crime has gone down. It might be the better policing. It might be the fact that it's more jailing more criminals. It might be the fact that some of the drug wars of the 80s have kind of petered out a bit. But it doesn't really seem like it had much to do with abortion. It's just clear that the post-Roe generation, unfortunately, seems a lot more likely to commit crimes than the generation born before Roe.
Our guest in our Decision Maker line has been Dr. Michael New. He is the Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Michigan Dearborn. He's an adjunct scholar at the Charlotte Lozier Institute, responding very effectively to some of the superficially rational arguments that the pro-abortion community makes to support the practice of abortion, and showing the emptiness and the fact that they simply do not stack up with what we know to be the truth. Well, Dr. New, again, thank you for coming to us live from the March for Life, and God bless you and the work that you continue to do, and look forward to continue reading more of your material.
Great. Thanks a lot. Enjoyed being on the show.
Dr. Michael New, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Michigan Dearborn, just exploding the arguments that abortion will reduce child abuse, it'll reduce crime, and reduce out-of-wedlock births. The opposite is the case. Back in 2, Focal Point AFR Talk.